Alright, hello everyone. Today is Friday, October 25th, and today I'm talking about the opposition between Mars and Cancer and Pluto and Capricorn. Um, I've already briefly gone over this, and just straight off the bat, there is something that's obvious about this in terms of the upcoming American election and expecting it's not a this is a pretty gnarly looking transit with Mars opposing Pluto, um, and there's a certain kind of apprehension leading up to the American election. Um, However, in my own case, I'm a Canadian, I'm a British Columbian, and interestingly enough, we just had a provincial election, and the result of this provincial election, we're going to be doing a official recount and tallying up all the absentee and mail-in ballots and stuff like that, because basically it was too close to call, right? And I think that there's something to be said about the Mars Pluto opposition with both these elections locally and also to our neighbors, the Americans in the South, that just goes to show that there's something about how the oftentimes I think that the individual can feel like really insignificant in the grand scheme of things, all the machinations of power and politics and all this kind of stuff. But in our recent British Columbian elections that we had, it really just goes to show that every vote counts, right? That there were ridings that were literally in a tie or had under 100 votes separating a win from a loss. And um, so we're doing this whole recount. There's something about Pluto that has to do with things that are like buried in the fine details, going over things with a fine tooth comb, all this kind of stuff, and how things which could seem really small and insignificant could actually influence things at a large scale, right? But I think there's also in Mars opposite Pluto, there can be the Mars being the god of war, the kind of masculine, yangy, aggressive planet, there can be a certain kind of frustration with the sense of futility or like the power imbalance of feeling like you're so small and minuscule and insignificant, and the problems are just too big that there's no way to have any contact, or even just being frustrated with what you can do in a democratic political system at all, right? And there's something. I mean, I'm just talking about the elections right now. There's obviously a lot of other things that have been going on with the wars. We have the war in the Middle East with Israel versus the pretty much the rest of the Middle East right now, or the Ukraine and Russia, and there's a kind of uncomfortable feeling about what the influence of people voting in an American election and America as the largest military superpower in the world and the influence of America on those wars, and the wars, and there's the whole thing about, like, you know, I have been staying relatively neutral in my politics about around this, but does it makes, I'm I'm anti-war, but I'm living in a country that's basically attaches itself onto the back of the biggest military country in the world, and we don't really even have a military because we're just kind of back, So there's this kind of question of, like, with Pluto, is like, is it hypocritical to be against war if somehow your kind of security is somehow insured by some kind of, like, agreement with another kind? I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't get into all that stuff. There's something though about the problems around war. There's also problems around natural disasters. Obviously, we had the hurricanes in America just recently. In BC, where I live, we had an atmospheric river, which is not as bad as a hurricane, mind you, but it still caused a lot of flooding and damages. And this is something that's fairly. A few years ago, we had one that also caused flooding. Can't remember exactly when that was. It gives me the sense. It's kind of strange because you can see these environmental impacts hitting places near where I live, but I'll be careful not to dox myself here, but I'll just say that where I live, I haven't been impacted in this personally, but it's close enough to feel like it's sort of creeping in, or to the areas around you, and that is another one of these examples where I think that the average person feels fairly minuscule and insignificant when compared to this huge global crisis that we're facing in terms of climate change, climate refugees, the impacts of these natural disasters. And I'm reminded of this thing too, that there's like Pluto often stands for things like hatred and discrimination and all this kind of stuff, and there's this Buddhist idea that it's like, of a person who's like rowing their little rowboat on the water and something bumps into them. They get all upset and angry, and then they turn and see that it was just an empty boat, and then they're not angry because there's nobody in the boat to get angry at, right? But part of the problem with the climate of these elections and these wars and all this other stuff is that I think that people very much do feel like there are other people in the boats to be angry at. People aren't just like, oh, well, that's c'est la vie, that's just how it goes. It's like people really do feel like there are other people out there who have competing interests, who are, opposing each other, right? And so there's something about this, though, with Pluto. I associate Pluto with fascism and a lot of what happened because Pluto was discovered around the time the fascists came to power, and there's something about Pluto that's kind of like I was saying before with the elections and the recount, and kind of like the devil in the details and going over things with a fine-tooth comb, that there's some Pluto could stand for something that's like conspiracies, that kind of, something swept under the rug, right? Or the idea that the banality of evil, the idea that the Holocaust was carried out with this kind of like bureaucratic kind of this way that you can hide what's really happening by just making it a bunch of numbers that you just have a bunch of government officials sign their name on, and it's kind of like abstracted from a way that by signing this paper you're signing people to death or something, right? That there's some kind of like Pluto is something that is hidden, that seem really extreme, and maybe people don't even, like, in its conspiracy sense, maybe people don't even take it seriously because it seems so outlandish and extreme, and they're likely to just write it off or something. So there could be a kind of like paranoid conspiratorial edge with Pluto, this Mars-Pluto conjunction. There could be this kind of like, and I think there's this thing about Mars being like the yongy, aggressive, assertive planet in its fall in Cancer, which is more of an emotionally sensitive sign. I try to, like, I don't know, I've been, my diet of media, which I've been consuming, has been changing over the years, and I've been listening to more podcasts from younger people, the younger generation, feeling kind of like, being a millennial who's feeling less like a young adolescent, and seeing what the young kids are like. But it's kind of interesting to like listen to the younger generation, because I get this sense of like when you're young, you have so much energy, right? And it's like when you're young, you have a kind of like the puer heroic drive, like you want to make a difference in the world. You don't want all your vital life energy to just be there to prop up the status quo when you can see there's obviously inherent problems with the status quo. And so I think there's this, like, a lot of young people have their vital energy to apply themselves to something, but they're frustrated because it just feels futile, right? It just feels like you want to make a difference in the world, but you're just banging your head against the wall, right? And I think that kind of frustration is something that could be set off around the Mars-Pluto, or the frustration with the voting system, or the frustration, like the fact that you're maybe in a situation where every vote counts. Maybe it is a close race, maybe it's a close election, but there could be a frustration with the whole political system and the problems that we're faced with, and it doesn't really seem like you have much of a choice, right? It seems like you're kind of like a lot of people talk about Pluto in terms of being constricted, right? Like the idea that, like, you have all these options, but you're funneling everything in through this very narrow bottleneck, which can only go one place, and you don't even maybe want to go it, so you just feel like you're getting oppressed into this one direction you don't want to go in necessarily, and you feel like you have your youth, your life ahead of you, your vital energy, but you're like, you're not going to make me do that, are you? You're not going to just push us all in this direction and say that's what we got to do. But that's maybe what it feels like right now with the Mars-Pluto, right? There's some other thing that has been on my mind. If you take into consideration this feeling of the sense of being insignificant in the face of all these problems that are so much bigger than us, or either that, or so kind of like obscured in the details, like the devil in the details, that we don't have access to it, then there's a sense of like having your youthful vitality, your yangy active energy that wants to do something, that wants to change and make a difference, but it doesn't know, there isn't really a clear point of contact where you can make that difference that's really going to change things. So you feel like this lack of options is like funneling you all into the same funnel that spits you out in the same direction, and you don't have any choices except for just to lend your own vital energy to the ends of some powerful control structure that you feel is out of your hands or whatever, right? There's something about that has been coming up with this sort of transit for me, which I've been thinking about how the younger generation talks about copes, right? And this is also, when we're talking about copes, we could bring in Neptune and Pisces, and there's this kind of dynamic where Mars is making its opposition to Pluto. It's making a trine to Neptune and Pisces. Actually, the trine to Neptune and Pisces is stronger right now because Mars is at 26, Neptune is at 27 Pisces. And then if you also look at Pluto and Neptune together, there's a sextile aspect with Pluto at 29, Neptune at 27 Pisces. And so I think that the Neptune influence on all this has to do with the idea of like copes or copium, or this kind of thing of like, you know, it also brings in this kind of question about like self-care, where there a lot of people might be like, oh well, there's all this terrible stuff going on in the world, especially also, like, I'm not getting that into covering the current events, but I've been seeing some disturbing news events popping up, under this transit, which isn't, that isn't completely, I'm not going to get into the details, but I don't, like, the thing is that there's a certain question about self-care and being like, well, I'm just going to be like, not get burnt out on the doom scroll, on trying to follow everything that's going on in the world. I'm just going to like withdraw from that and focus on my personal life and the changes that I can make in my own life and all this kind of stuff. And but then there's a sort of question that, like, is there some sort of inherent privilege to that? Or and then also this kind of thing, like, if some people might be, in a position where they don't have the luxury of just, like, unplugging from something that's happening on a screen, that's like their actual life is impacted with this, right? Like, and this is like where it's kind of like the sense of Pluto being like power imbalances, in that, like, I mean, it could just be, in my own case, like, zooming into my own local area, not being so caught up on the international stuff. Even just people in municipalities nearby me could be very impacted by this flood. And there's this kind of question about, like, what is there actually anything in my power as an individual, with my own agency and my own ability to make choices, that I can do with my life to help these other people? Or is it like, is that overstretching what I'm capable of? Or there's this kind of idea of, like, the pressure, there could be, like, with Pluto and Neptune, there could be, like, pressure to give to charity, but then you're not sure if the people running the charities are honest or not. Because there's often this problem where people will collect a lot of money in charity, and then with the money that they collect, most of the money that they collect goes to pay the people that are working for the charity company, and then a very small amount actually goes to the charity that this is apparently in support of, right? And I've also heard the problem come up with around political activism. Like, a lot of people might raise money for a certain political activist cause, and then just pocket the money, saying, like, oh, well, you're going to help poor, people in need because, I can pay for my groceries now, and I'm a political activist. You're helping me feed me so I can continue to do political work. Thank you for your donations. Like, there can be certain kinds of, like, and if you're not looking into the details, with the devil in the details of the accounting of where it's going, you might be getting ripped off, thinking you're doing something, for a noble and just cause or something like that, right? There's this, what I'm thinking, though, with this whole thing about, like, the self-care also, is that there's this whole thing about going unconscious, and the way that Pluto has to do with fear and the unconscious. And I'm specifically thinking of Twin Peaks: The Return. There's this episode that stands out in David Lynch's Twin Peaks: Return, episode 8, I believe it is, called "Got a Light," where they have a scene that has to do with the Trinity nuclear test unleashing a force of fear and evil on the world, and there's a certain kind of, like, stuff to do with these spirits of, like, the woodsmen and these guys who are like Abraham Lincoln, but they're like these kind of weird ghost characters. If you haven't seen it, I don't know if I can do it justice just by describing it to you. So if you haven't seen Twin Peaks, what are you doing? What are you doing with your life? What are you doing with your life that's so important that you're just going to, like, not watch Twin Peaks, right? Like, I don't understand. But there is, what I'm trying to say, there's a line in this particular episode where this Abraham Lincoln woodsman character is talking about the whites of the eyes, right? And there's something that, like, with your pupils are looking in the other direction, like, that there's the whites of the eyes represent this kind of, like, unconscious, right? And there's this kind of idea of, I was read from Gabor Mate book that I've got here. Whoops, this one, The Myth of Normal. I'm working my way through this one. Gabor Mate is a local Vancouver guy, and Gabor Mate was talking about the idea of addiction recovery, sobriety, and that how there could be a kind of sobriety that isn't so much defined by being really strict about just avoiding all kinds of different substances, but rather having the sense of being able to look life in the face, right? Being able to look the situation in the eye and to be honest, to have, and I think that with Pluto, there's this thing about integrity, right? There could be two sides of it, right? One side is the fear, the unconscious, and the other side is the personal integrity of who are you when nobody's watching? You know, what are you, are you hiding something? And not even just hiding from other people, but are you hiding something from yourself, right? And there's something about this that, like, I feel, if you tie this in with what I'm trying to say about, like, the younger generation having all this active, yangy energy, but maybe being frustrated in where do you invest this energy, there's a tendency to focus a lot of energy on things like, I don't know, like gaming, like social media addiction, like this endless kind of stimulation and distraction or whatever. But there's something about there's something it all kind of, like, there's something that I've just been noticing since I made my last video, which is like this idea of the cope, right? Which it could be like self-care, which could be like, I'm not going to get fussed about what's happening on the news. I'm not going to get fussed about these natural disasters. I'm going to, like, have a day where I just sit in my spa bubble bath and listen to relaxing music and, and not fuss about all these things which don't directly affect me. But then there could be, like, in terms of personal integrity, maybe even when you withdraw your attention in that way, maybe the things that affect you do still affect you, or maybe you contribute to things unconsciously, right? And there's a certain problem about this because it could be like, in consumer habits or something like that, it could be unreasonable to, ask everybody to be more conscious about what they're spending their money on, or suggesting that, like, consumer choice is going to be the way that you solve the problem, right? But there's still this, like, this quality that I find that's like people are, or like there might be something else where people don't want, they feel some obligation to not go unconscious, right? They feel some obligation to pay attention to all the things that are going on in the world, but then that creates the doom scroll effect, where you're just, like, scrolling through a whole bunch of information and feeling like you are doing something productive because at least you're keeping up and you're feeling concerned about what's going on, but your vital life force energy, your ability to actually do something is just getting, it's like having the life sucked out of you by some sort of vampire force that's just like, you're just, you could be optimistic and positive and have some sort of, like, energy to make some positive change in your life, but then you're just like, oh, but I gotta pay attention to, all these disasters and all these wars and all these tragedies, and you're just like, oh, fuck, I don't think I can do anything. I guess I'll just have to sit at home in my spa date and self-soothe myself for the rest of my life. I don't have any, all these problems are so much bigger than anything that I can do. So, and if I try to raise this issue of, with people just get angry at me. People are like, you're just stressing us out. go play a little video game, and so you feel like you're like this infantile child who, like, I'm an adult, but what can I do to actually help the world? I can't do anything, so I'll just go dick around and play video games, or I'll just go and shop. I'll go shopping. I'll just buy some stuff, and then you're kind of, because this, what do you have control over in your life? Do you have control over all these big picture stuff? Or do you have control over, like, what color pants you put on in the morning, right? Do you have control over, like, what, how you're redecorating your house or something, right? There's this feeling like you're, like, everything that you have agency or control over doesn't actually do anything to make the situation in your life better or make the situation in other people's lives better, and you're just stuck in this, like, stupid coping mechanism that doesn't actually do anything to improve things, and it could even be a kind of unhealthy addiction, right? And there's also this kind of sense that, like, in our, even the stuff that if we were trying to, like, okay, what are some healthier coping mechanisms? Maybe we can do something more healthy, right? Like, maybe you're just sitting around playing video games all day. You're not in very good physical health. So we're going to, like, go to the gym. We're going to work out. We're going to get in shape. We're going to, like, clean up our bedrooms or something, right? But there's this sort of thing that's, like, I don't want to sing, and, like, I have to admit, I live with my family. My sister has been better about this. But have you ever had, like, a family member or a sibling, and, like, they're gonna, like, clean the house, right? And they're cleaning the house, but they start, like, slamming, like, you put the dishes away and you just slam the cupboards, bam, 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 right? And it's sort of like, what the fuck are you doing? You know what I mean? And it's kind of like you get the sense that there's, like, people have, like I said, you have this vital force of Mars, like, you have this energy that wants to, like, have agency or active force to, like, do things, get the work done, and all this kind of stuff. But there's certain, like, you get the sense that with Mars opposite Pluto, there's some other problem that isn't being addressed by the work you're doing, right? This sort of Jordan Peterson thing about, like, clean up your bedroom, get your life in order. Like, I can't change politics, but I could get, I could go to the gym and bench press a whole bunch. There's, like, I just keep getting this sense that it's like we justify our coping mechanisms as being things that are healthier than giving into addictive, self-destructive, bad habits, which is fair enough, right? But at the same time, there's a sense that there's, like, a whole lot of energy. Like, you're gonna be like, I'm gonna, like, have these things, like cleaning my house, like getting exercise, doing the healthy, productive things to do self, but you're in a sense that they're like, these behaviors are carrying a load that's a lot bigger than just, like, the need to be a little bit more fit, the need to have your house be a bit cleaner. It's like there's a lot more frustration that isn't getting dealt with just cleaning the house up. There's a lot of frustration that isn't being dealt with by putting on a bit of muscle. You know what I'm saying? And there's this kind of sense that, like, in like playing a video game, you could have a lot of, like, anger and frustration, and you could just be channeling this into having your little, like, Elden Ring sword fight or something like this. And it's sort of like, you think that's harmless, but, like, where does that energy go, right? Like, and I think that there's something where, like, if we are dealing with reality, the actual real world and real world problems, there's an opportunity for the real things that matter in life being legitimately, it's not wrong to be frustrated about these things. And if the frustration goes where it's supposed to go, there's an opportunity to change or to transform things. But we're in this thing where it's all on me as an individual, and if I'm not happy with my life, it's because I need to exercise more, or because I need to clean my house up more, I need to do all this other stuff. But there's all this frustration that it's like, when people try to do this, like, I also saw somebody on Facebook describe, like, this is a random person talking about how they were cat sitting, I think, right? They're looking after somebody's cat, and the same person hired somebody else to do a cleaning job, like a maid or something. So, like, the person who's cat sitting has been invited to do this thing, and the person who's cleaning has been invited to do this thing. There's no direct connection between them. But the person who's cat sitting, the maid who's even getting paid for this, is doing the rage cleaning stuff of like slamming cupboards and just and it's like you could have your job which you're getting paid for, and you could have all this frustration about things that are either personal to you or collective to you, and that you could do a good job in your job and be responsible for taking care of your own individual lot in life, but what's all there's all this excess energy that just goes into like slamming cupboards really hard and just being like and it's kind of like it just kind of feels like in the collective consciousness of there's just a lot of that going around right now. There's a lot of anger, there's a lot of frustration, there's a lot of like bad vibes, which we, as much as we try to like put these into healthy constructive coping mechanisms and focus on our there's something about this it's like the cope of like self-care or self-responsibility that is displacing energy that if you're the person listening to somebody else rage clean, you can kind of get that there's something that's not being dealt with here, that's just overflowing, that doesn't have a proper place to go, and it's kind of like it makes the world feel kind of crazy, right? Because the other thing about this is that we're all conditioned to just like pretend that this isn't, like with Pluto, it's like the thing you sweep under the rug, or the thing that's like the banality of evil, where there could be all sorts of like tragedies and atrocities, but it's on a it could be like doing an inventory of like your stock in the warehouse, where you just all these people are going to die. We'll just sign off. Okay, great. And then there's all this energy that they're not dealing with, that they're just pushing off, and that we're all playing like hot potato with it. Like, oh my god, the world is fucked. Oh, I guess I'll just self-improve myself. So I've got a glowing smile, and I've got big muscles, and I'm the strong individual who's like, at least the world's burning down around me, but I can say that I did a good job in my life, and I can have a sort of smug sense of superiority, but we don't have any fucking way to deal with these collective issues, and we're all fucking going crazy because of it. And the only solution we have is just like more spa dates, more gym exercising at the gym, more I also get the sense that like this creates a thing where it's like, if there are these surface level resentments, right? Surface, very, very minor things where it's like, you could like be perfectly, you're like, okay, I've got it all sorted out. I got my nutritional supplements that make me feel better. I got my exercise routine. I'm keeping my house clean. And then like, I'm just gone even, and then somebody like cuts you off in traffic and you just lose it. You're like, oh, you just flip right out, right? And it just feels like this is with the Mars Pluto. It just feels like there's so much of like, it feels like you're like walking on thin ice in a world where everybody's just about to just explode on each other, because our whole system of keeping this machine going is built around something which is always just offloaded, that isn't dealt with, that is like this, like it's like Pluto, right? It's like the farthest out planet in the solar system, which, according to scientists, maybe it's not even a planet, right? It's just this little thing that's like, it's extreme because of how far away it is from all the other stuff and how small it is. It's just a small little thing that is just really far out, and we don't really have to talk about it. And then, but it also has to do with terrorism and genocide and hatred. But we're not going to bring that up now. We have to create a nice environment for people to be comfortable. But there's this thing that's always just kind of like, bearing down on you, and you're like, what's the right outlet for that, right? Because if I just, there might be varying degrees of healthy copes, but the idea that Pluto in its higher frequency is supposed to stand for transformation, right? And, I don't think just by like being all like, I can feel like, you could transform your habits. I'm going to go from being a guy who just sits on my computer all day to a guy who works out at the gym, right? But there's something about like, I just get the sense that there's some other transformation that's always just being displaced, right? And there's some kind of energy that you're feeling that's like all these problems that people aren't dealing with, that people are just passing around like a hot potato, and the person who has to deal like with it is basically the oppressed person that's getting the raw end of the deal. And I have to admit, I'm a white guy living in the suburbs, that my house hasn't been fucked up by a natural disaster or anything like that yet. I'm in a privileged position, and my life is pretty easy. I don't have that much to complain about, but there's kind of like, I just kind of feel like the pressure, if I go out and work out at the gym, if I make my house really nice and clean, if I do all these kind of things, it's kind of like, well, good for me, but the world is still fucked. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, there's certain, this is what's been on my mind with this Mars-Pluto transit anyways. Hope, and I don't know, I also just, another thing that's been going on for me has been the ongoing question of making this channel and the way the YouTube algorithm works and this kinds of astrology that I just don't feel like I'm really vibing in the same way with a lot of the other astrologers that I see. I will say though that I do think that Chris Brennan and Austin Coppock and the astrology podcasts are like class acts. That these guys just have it down. They're doing a good job. And so, like, why wait? I don't know. Maybe I don't need to waste time watching a whole bunch of other astrologers that I just don't vibe with. But there are, I don't know. I'm just putting it out there. That's another thing that I've just been kind of like feeling a little bit like a bit of a misfit, or not really in line with what people expect from doing astrology videos. But I've been trying to embrace that and seeing that as an opportunity to do something different, rather than just pressure to change myself to conform to whatever else is popular out there. Because that, like, again, it feels like this sort of like being funneled into this really narrow thing where if you want to do this, you have to do everything just in this really, you have to put yourself through it's like, almost feels like the meat grinder, or like the being fed through this really high pressure thing that's going to make you into this, like, rigid version of a perfect person or something like that, right? And I think there's something also about, like, the question of integrity and authenticity, especially with the context of all these elections and stuff like that, if you're going to have a political election, you want it to be authentic. You don't want it to be the product of voter suppression, voter oppression, that kind of stuff. You want your leaders not to be hiding, all these skeletons in their closets. You want them to be presenting their authentic, you don't want them to be representing some shadowy force lurking in the shadows. You want them to present their honest vision for what they're doing, right? And you want them to be having an election in an honest, coherent way that has integrity. But Pluto is always the corruption that's left out of the picture. And the part that there is, without getting into all this like conspiracy theory stuff, there is this basic truth that something is always going to be obscured from the mainstream media, the public sphere, and that in terms of, like, say, organized crime only can only keep going because somebody in power has a deal made, right? And that there's certain, like, if you look too closely, you may see that the whole system is basically compromised with some kind of form of organized crime or another, and that because the power structures that aren't going to let this change. It's like we have a world where we've got a lot of people who have a lot of frustration, but the best you can do is just work on your little self-improvement project, because you don't want to get the wrong people upset at you for actually trying to make a difference. If you actually get close to making a difference, you might have to worry about car bombs or something like that, right? If you just stick to, like, you know, your little self-improvement project, you know, you're going to live a safe and comfortable, happy life, and, you know, be comfortable about, you know, you're not going to do anything to make any changes, right? You're not going to solve any problems, and all the people that profit off of the problems in the world can just keep going, you know, living like that as a bunch of fat cats for the rest of their lives, right? And this is the world we live in. So I don't know. It's not the most cheery and optimistic transit, but this is what's been on my mind. Thank you for watching.